And this is Thomas C. Oden's summary of a writing where Wesley had tried to rebuke an evolutionist or something like a proto-evolutionist in his time named Count de Buffon, or Buffoon, however you want to pronounce it. The writing by Wesley is called Remarks on the Count de Buffon's Natural History. This was published in the Arminian magazine in 1782. I'm going to read Thomas C. Oden's summary of this from John Wesley's Scriptural Christianity on page 182, and then I'm going to actually read the entire writing. So this is Thomas C. Oden talking. Wesley argued pithily against the hypotheses that the earth is only a slice of the sun cut off from it by the stroke of a comet. And then he also argues against the following thoughts: that the inner core of the earth is glass, that there is no final cause or purpose in natural history, okay, that everything's accidental, everything's a chance. All right, that is an idea in this proto-evolutionist in 1782 that Wesley was preaching against. That in most beings there are fewer useful or necessary organs than those that are useless or redundant. In other words, this idea of the vestigial organs, that we evolved from animals, and a lot of our organs don't matter because they're rendered obsolete, and they're just residue from animal evolution. The vestigial organ concept. Wesley preached against that. That there is no essential difference between vegetables and animals. Wesley preached against that. That's actually an evolutionary idea, because life has to come from non-life, and different kinds have to come from completely different kinds. And sooner or later, through the evolutionary tree, a corn stalk turns into a deer and a man, and the lines can be drawn. Wesley's preaching against that. Preaches against that the world existed from eternity. Well, thankfully, Wesley preached against the idea that the world existed from eternity. Okay, because that's that millions of years, billions of years world concept. Okay, it was back in 1782, before Darwin. And in fact, the whole concept of millions and millions of years can be found in the hellfire sermons of the Puritans. Being in hell for millions of years was how that expression was used. Millions of years. Millions of years was first used as an expression by hellfire preachers of people being in hell for millions of years. Yeah, and then the expression millions of years started to get used by geologists and deists and atheists. And they applied it to the earth. Wesley preached against the idea that the world was created by chance. This is 1782, before Darwin. Before Darwin, 1782, Wesley is preaching against the idea that there's no difference between veggies and animals, that the world's existed from eternity, and that the world was created by chance. That millions of years, the world was created by millions of years by accident, and that animals came from vegetables. That concept was before Charles Darwin, 100 years before Charles Darwin. Darwin's just the popularizer of it. That's all he was. He was the poster child. He was the popularizer of it. This atheistic garbage was in the time of Wesley, and Wesley was preaching against it. He preached against it. Dr. Oden says that on these grounds, Wesley ranked the Count to be far beneath Voltaire, Rousseau, and Hume, all of whom acknowledge the being of a God in religion as an understanding. Now, that was John Wesley's Scriptural Christianity by Thomas Oden, page 82. I'm going to go into the actual writing now that John Wesley wrote. Remarks on the Count de Buffon's Natural History, printed in the year 1782. But is not the Count de Buffon first conceit full as odd, that the earth, and so every other planet, is only a slice of the sun, cut off from it by the stroke of a comet? He that would take pains to confute this wild theory must have little to do. In consequence of this, he supposes all the inner part of the earth to be glass, and strains every natural phenomenon to support his hypothesis. He is certainly a man of a most lively imagination. Pity that his judgment is not equal to it. Many of his thoughts are quite singular. For example, the upper stratum of the earth, from which all animals and vegetables derive their growth and nourishment, is nothing but a composition of the decayed particles of animal and vegetable bodies. Impossible! Was it composed of decayed animals and vegetables before any animal or vegetable had decayed? Quote, the number of seashells is so great in every part of the earth, it is absolutely impossible that all the fish which inhabited those shells should live at the same time. Quote, neither have we any proof that the earth was entirely dissolved at the time of the deluge. Wesley, I believe therefore that some of those shells were deposited by the deluge, but most of them in succeeding ages. The Count's theory of the earth, Wesley says, is wild and whimsical enough, but it is innocent. I cannot say so much for his theory of generation, which I take to be utterly inconsistent with reason and Scripture. To prepare the way for it, he first endeavors to confound the distinction between animals and vegetables, between which all men but himself know there is an essential, unalterable difference, every animal having a degree of self-motion and sensation, neither of which any vegetable has. Then he substitutes for the plain word generation a quaint word of his own, reproduction, in order to level man not only with the beasts that perish, but with nettles or onions. He lays the foundation of his wonderful theory. The Creator. I exceedingly doubt whether he believes there is any such being. Quote, has put no fixed limits between animals and vegetables. 2. The production of an animal requires a smaller exertion of nature than the producing a vegetable, or rather no exertion at all. Wesley, marvelous indeed. 3. Quote, animation or life is a property belonging to all matter, and is not thought, too? Wesley says. It was at first my design to go through the whole of the Count's work, but I dare not spend my time so idly. Although the Edinburgh translator has shortened it much, it is still intolerably long and tedious, and the author's fancy so vastly outruns his judgment that he asserts 100 palpable falsehoods. But what shocks the serious reader most is his obscenity and his atheism. The former glares even where one would least expect it, in describing, for instance, a horse and a mule. I wonder how he missed a similar piece of natural history relating to that noble animal, a sow. As to his atheism, I was for some time in doubt, as he often names God to grace his page. But I can doubt no longer, as he openly professes and defends materialism, and every materialist is an atheist. I cannot set him down for any other. But were more proof wanting, that curious sentence is plain enough. Quote, in most beings there are fewer useful or necessary parts than those which are useless or redundant. But as we wish to refer everything to a certain end, when parts have no apparent uses, we either suppose that their uses are concealed from us, or invent relations which have no existence. Wesley says, he asserts that this must totally deny a wise creator. Consequently, he must either believe that chance created the world, or that it existed from eternity. In either case, he denies the being of a God. I cannot, therefore, but place the Count de Buffon as far beneath Voltaire, Rousseau, and Hume, all of whom acknowledge the being of a God, in religion as in understanding. Wesley basically demonstrates that here you have either a deist or an atheist, a metaphysical materialist, who spends 1,200 to 1,800 pages on harmless naturalistic observations about the world, and then laces it in with atheistic remarks and comments. Exactly what you got in Romans chapter 1. People using harmless, naturalistic, scientific pursuits as a means by which to suppress the truth of Christianity with atheistic, quasi-atheistic, and almost atheistic thoughts embedded and interlaced within naturalistic geological observations, suppressing the truth in their unrighteousness, professing themselves to be wise, and yet at the same time becoming fools.